Welcome to another webinar of the AXIM webinar series. In light of recent events, welcome to another webinar of the AXIM webinar series. In light of recent events, the theme that we're talking to today is minimizing the impact of COVID-19 on your contact center operation. My name is Andrew Rufner. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AXIM, and I will be your presenter and host today. The agenda for today is, first of all, just to look at, from a broader perspective, from a broader business perspective, the impact on that the current pandemic has on your organization, based on experiences that we've made with customers, large customers that we're working with at the moment, and also framework that we're using in those organizations to support our customers. So we're going to talk about a framework of that you can use in terms of how to approach an issue like this. We will then drill down and look at specifically from an operations perspective and from a technology perspective, a couple of areas that we believe most customers will have in common and things for you to think about today and then in the near future as you're responding to the current issues. We'll look at customers or types of organizations that we can learn from, talk about that very briefly, lessons from the past that we can look to. We will also talk a little bit about monitoring and managing performance in light of the shift to remote and home working, and then we'll sort of summarize and also look at some of the short and mid-term benefits we can gain by addressing the current crisis effectively, and then putting in structural measures. Okay, with that having been said, let's get straight into it. So what are the immediate challenges? Well, I think they're relatively obvious. The immediate challenge is really to shift to more of a command and control structure from an organizational perspective as things develop very fast, and management is really required to respond very quickly and effectively to the changing conditions on the ground, which means that there's a different type of management required, at least short term, to put in place the required measurements and measures to operate effectively. Obviously, we need to protect our workforce. We'll need to protect as a society, so there are definitely measures around that as well. We'll need to ensure that we can maintain service levels to our customers, minimize financial, operational, and other impacts, and then make sure that we increase the level of flexibility in the organization so we can deal with changes in demand and changes in developments on the outside. So that's definitely important, create more flexibility for ourselves. And then fundamentally also communicate. So communicating effectively at different layers, internally, externally, is absolutely critical in today's environment and as we face this challenge. So in terms of a framework to use, this is a framework that we're using in engagements with customers today to respond effectively to the challenges. And we basically segmented that response into 5 different domains. So domain number 1, which is an obvious one, is workforce protection. So this deals essentially with putting in place policies to deal with the challenges that we've got right now, and also the management of it. As I said, the way of management in a crisis situation like this is obviously very different than the way that we manage an organization, a large organization, on an ongoing basis. So definitely the structure and the management is going to be different. And as workers start to work remote, the way that we manage our teams change as well. Two-way communication. So communication is important. People need to understand what is expected from them. People need to understand when policies and procedures change. So that needs to be communicated effectively and in a timely manner. But at the same time, in a high velocity changing environment, it is absolutely essential to make sure that there's two-way communications as well, so that the management teams are well aware of what's going on at the shop level, if you will. If we're looking at the workforce, we obviously need to look at segmenting the workforce into essential, non-essential employees that we can treat differently, and obviously contractors. Need to look at facilities and the on-site norms, and then obviously also engagement with local and state health government institutions to ensure effective communications and compliance with any regulation. The second domain is everything to do with supply chain. So that's got to do with the engagement of suppliers, whether those suppliers deliver staff or they deliver managed services or they deliver infrastructure, doesn't really matter, but it's important to reach out to those suppliers, get them to understand how you are responding, what situation that you're in, also in terms of any changes that you've got on the demand side, and what you require from your suppliers and partners in order to be able to operate effectively. Technology and operations in situations or in a world where we're using cloud services, a lot of our services are outsourced. Again, these are usually suppliers. So again, it's important to understand, for these suppliers to understand where you stand and to open up active communication channels with them to make sure that they can actually deliver what it is you need. And then demand management, which sort of falls into the previous two categories, of course, in terms of understanding the demand that you have and then splitting that out to the different suppliers in your supply chain, as well as your customers, and then being able to manage that effectively and communicate effectively. The third domain is customer engagement. It would seem a relatively obvious one, but very often in situations like these, we're very internally focused, and customer engagement tends to be an after or a second thought. But just in this situation, it's absolutely crucial to be absolutely transparent with your business customers as to where you stand, what your issues are, and how you're responding, and how you're going to ensure that you're going to meet the service levels that your customers have and going to meet their demand. So actively reaching out to customers, ensuring your customers are protected, ensuring your customers are confident in your ability to continue to deliver is absolutely essential in a situation like this. Financial stress testing should not come as a surprise, but again, it is something that we found that in many of the customers that we've been working with initially was not top of the list. Yet we are in all environments seeing quite substantial shifts in demand. Some customers have got increasing demand, some customers have got fluctuating or lower demand. But in any case, it is important to look at the different scenarios, both short, mid, and longer term, and start to look at what this actually means from both an operational, but also from a financial perspective, and then put the relevant measures in place. So financial stress testing is absolutely essential to ensure the organization's ability to survive in the longer term. And then finally, sort of relating back to what I just said in the beginning, is this what we call the nerve center integration. So really pulling together the management structure in such a fashion that the issues are mapped out quite clearly. Everybody's aware of it. The issues are managed, they're put in portfolios, and there is alignment in leadership and in the communication. In situations like these, it is absolutely crucial that management speaks clearly with one voice to all of its stakeholders, and that issues that come up are being managed effectively and quickly. So this nerve center type of integration is absolutely essential, and this is a different management style than what we tend to see during a usual operation. So these are some of the measures that we've put in place with some of our customers in response to the challenges that we're faced with. On a more tactical or operational level, if we sort of drill down and look at two key domains, operations and technology, things of course start to change and be different depending on the type of organization that you are. Whether you're a contact center in a large enterprise or a BPO, you'll obviously be very different with with your requirements. But at a very high level, these are some of the points that we've seen with our customers and that deserve absolute thought and are common across all of the contact centers that we're working with. As a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's obviously a shift to more remote and home working rather than having people on premise. This basically means that from an organizational perspective, we need to start to think of tiering of resources. How are we going to deal with contractors? How are we dealing with core staff? Can some of the other staff work at home? Who needs to be where, and how do we support it? So the organizational structure, but also the management of it, will change substantially, and that requires quite a bit of thought. The management style changes, specifically in a contact center where supervisors and managers are actually quite used to sitting with their agents and having daily contact with them, and also monitoring them while being close to them. If all of these workers start to work remote now, this changes the way that we manage these agents. And getting people to work remote, to work from home, is also quite stressful for the employees and for the workforce. So they will not only need management in the sense of monitoring, but they will most likely also need instruction and coaching to be able to function in an effective manner in this changed environment. And with that, of course, also comes the tooling, the policies, and all of the other support that's required. I already alluded to this, so the impact on agents that we're seeing is very substantial. Moving them from a relatively stable, structured workplace into a home or remote environment can, for some people, be quite stressful and can definitely lead to a drop in performance and stress. So it is absolutely essential, in order to maintain performance levels and ensure that you can meet your customer demand, is to not only put the tooling in place for these remote agents, but train and coach them as well to make sure that they can actually be effective, which demands a lot from the worker, but it also demands a lot and a different style from the management teams. And then with that obviously comes monitoring and dashboarding. We're all used to, for example, having wall boards in contact centers. As you're working from home, you don't no longer have access to those in typical environments. So the question then is, what's the monitoring that you're going to use? What kind of analytics you're going to provide, and make sure that the agents actually understand how the team is performing, how they are performing, and still feel part of the group. So again, the whole monitoring and dashboarding is definitely one of the critical areas that deserve thought, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the options there later on. And then from a technology perspective, there's obviously fundamentally two big pillars. One is the telecoms area and one is the IT. And again, the requirements and the impact will be very different from organization to organization. But what we're seeing as a common thread across all of our customers is that it is absolutely essential in situations like these, where there are potential large changes, to have ongoing monitoring and analytics on your telecoms infrastructure, as the mix and the flow patterns may change, and prepare to respond. So get the teams to do scenario development. Make sure that the technical teams also understand what the lines of business are actually doing and planning, so they can understand how the business is responding, how the business is adapting, and what the consequences are for the technology infrastructure. Tactical issues that some of our customers have put in place are things like codec alterations, changing traffic patterns in multi-system environments, etc., to optimize as tactical measures, always ensuring they've got sufficient capacity, effective routing, prioritization, etc., making sure they've got enough VPN capacity and so on to support that shift to home working. But fundamentally, the analytics, monitoring and planning and scenario development is absolutely essential to ensure that your organization can continue to operate and respond effectively. An interesting side note also is that we've seen that some of our customers that are using SD-WAN infrastructures have given them the ability to respond a lot faster and deploy infrastructure a lot faster while managing it centrally through policies. So if you haven't looked into SD-WAN yet, our recommendation would definitely be, once the pressure subsides, is to start to look at this and look at whether you can make this work and allow you to respond a lot faster to any changing demand. On the IT side, I think the steps are pretty straightforward. So as you're pushing more agents to work remote or at home, or other workers as well, the setups need to be standardized and need to be gotten ready to be easy to deploy. And just keeping those images ready so you can push them is absolutely key. Ensure that you got enough hardware, obviously, and you got the logistics and the support, so your agents and your remote workers can actually operate effectively. If you're not able to support them, that again may lead to a whole host of other issues, which will ultimately result in a drop in performance. So make sure you've got that covered as well. And then ultimately, unfortunately, it is important to point out as well that it is absolutely essential that in situations like these, you do not compromise on security. Our security teams have observed that specifically in situations like these, and currently we're seeing an uptake in malicious activity. So actually, rather than what you would assume that in a critical situation like this, it actually drops, it increases quite substantially. So the risks are higher today than they were a couple of weeks ago. And that's something to take into account as you're planning these rollouts. If we're looking to best practices and lessons learned, it is interesting to look at organizations that are seeing large changes in demand. And two good examples are the Red Cross and the airline industry as a whole, that are industries that are actually quite used to very highly changing demand structures. And if you drill down and you look at a high level what the kind of things are that these organizations are doing and doing very effectively, is it first of all planning effectively business continuity and disaster recovery, planning effectively, reviewing it on a regular basis, testing it on a regular basis, putting the processes in place that allow them to respond effectively and quickly to any challenge that they're facing. Add events that shift workforce to these scenarios as well. And these are typically organizations that either outsource a lot and or also have got a substantial amount of remote workforce that are used to quickly ramping up with third parties and remote to home workers. But as you know, remote and home workers or bringing in outsourcers does change the way that the demand on your systems looks. So again, these are things that need to be taken into account, need to be worked out with the business to understand what these scenarios look like, and then translate them also into IT and operations to understand exactly what the execution of such plans would actually mean. Plan for fluctuations in demand. Many organizations deal with fluctuations, some more than others, but it is always important and good practice to look at fluctuations in demand and understanding how you could deal with that, so that when you actually see increased demand, you can respond quickly, adequately, and effectively. Since remote working in general has been a trend for many, many years, again, it is something if you haven't done so yet, we recommend that you embrace and embed it into your processes and services. And you can use remote working also as a means to drive cost efficiency through the organization, and again, increase also your level of flexibility, as you may have workers that are not full-time, but part-time, and can help you deal with fluctuations in demand. I mentioned it earlier also, don't compromise on security. And these are organizations that are large enough to take these two examples, that they are stringent when it gets to security. So this is definitely a recommendation. Don't compromise on security as you go in more remote and going into different environments. That's the one thing that you do not want to do. And then last but least, communicate. As things change, in an organization, it is absolutely essential to communicate effectively and quickly internally, so everybody's aligned, everybody understands where they are, but also communicate externally to your customers and suppliers, so both can anticipate and understand what you're going to be able to deliver or what you will be demanding, and can ensure that they can actually deliver. These are just some of the key points that we've observed and some of the processes that organizations that deal with crisis and fluctuation in demand on a more regular basis have put in place. And for all those of us that don't do this on a daily basis, this is definitely something that we can learn from. And if you're more interested to learn more about that, we would definitely be more than happy to talk to you about it. Monitoring and analytics. So first of all, these two terms are very often used interchangeably, and they are definitely not the same thing. So monitoring is monitoring an ongoing operation, and analytics is the ability to actually drill down and analyze and understand potential root causes of things that we are observing with our monitoring. Now, as we're shifting resources as part of the response to this pandemic to different locations, to work from home, our patterns and our management structures change, and people are impacted. And as a consequence, we will have an impact on the operation, and we may have an impact on performance levels, consequently on cost, consequently on bottom line. So monitoring is absolutely essential. Having the infrastructure in place and the ability to monitor at all different levels, right from the management team to the actual operational manager, potentially even right down to the agent that is seeing how he and his team are performing, is essential for a number of reasons. It needs to be available, in our view, to all key stakeholders so they can understand how the business is operating and what the demand levels look like and what the performance looks like. On the other hand, monitoring also needs to be easy to use. Any monitoring or any tool that requires a PhD in data analytics to run some analytics, or have weeks of training or days of training to use a tool, is never going to be effective. In situations like these, when things go wrong or when things change, you want to be able to have a look at what's going on quickly, understand it, drill down, find the root cause, and respond effectively and timely. So an example of a modern monitoring platform for contact centers is Axiom Contact Data. We use one of our products. There's a range of other products on the market as well that do similar things. And our recommendation is really, if you're looking at monitoring and analytics, look at it as a tool in a single platform. You do not want different groups, different stakeholders looking at different data. You want everybody looking at the same data, monitoring it, and then when you're performing analytics, looking at the same data so you can have a meaningful conversation as to what's going on, and then about the measures that you want to take. The platforms need to be able to ingest large amounts of data from different sources. So not only from the contact center, if you've got your other ERP systems, customer support systems, social media streams, etc., the platform needs to be able to ingest it, correlate it, and it needs to be set up in such a manner that it has got a very, very fast learning curve. And web-based platforms are the easiest way to do that. They provide the ability to be accessed from anywhere with any kind of device, and they tend to be very easy to use without a lot of training. That also affects your total cost of ownership. So the easier and the faster they're to be able to stand them up as cloud-based services, for example, if your organization can actually do that. And then also having them easy to use, ideally with reports that are prepared by experts. So even if you're not an expert in contact center infrastructure, for example, there are templates that you can use, deploy, and then start to understand what's going on is absolutely essential in your ability to respond effectively. The other thing that's essential here is the ability to make it available to different stakeholders. So whether it is your agent that's looking at it, your supervisor or the contact center manager, as well as the management teams, or even customers giving them the ability to look at the services that you're providing is absolutely essential to be able to do that off the same platform. So in terms of analytics and monitoring, that's definitely what we're seeing with the customers that are performing really well at the moment, is that they've got these kind of tools in place. And this is definitely what we recommend to do. So in summary, if responding effectively to a situation like the one that we're finding ourselves in right now requires a holistic approach. And it requires the management team to act decisively and in a coherent fashion and communicate effectively. We've outlined a potential option of an approach with 5 key domains. You may take a different approach, but I think the key elements we've probably captured in terms of what we suggest and what we're seeing many of our large customers do. The operational and the technical impacts are immediate, and they require a structured and effectively executed approach, but they also require thinking about what's next. So scenario development, planning ahead, effective communication with stakeholders, be they suppliers, customers, etc., is absolutely essential. And in order to understand the scenarios and how your organization is operating against those scenarios, monitoring and analytics is one of the key tools. So if you don't have the monitoring and analytics tools in place to understand what's going on, it's close to impossible to respond in an effective and coherent manner. And look to other players in your industry and in other vertical markets to learn from them. I gave you 2 examples of 2 types of customers that are well set up to deal with challenges like this, maybe not quite as extreme as what we're seeing right now, but in generally with large fluctuations in demand. And these are organizations that we can learn from and are typically quite willing to share. And last but not least, obviously, the experts that we have that are working with some of these customers are more than happy to share what they're seeing with you and having a conversation with you as to how you can become more effective if that's something that you're interested in. We've come to the end of the webinar, so all that remains is to thank you for your interest. I would like to invite you to follow us on social media, so either Twitter or LinkedIn, so we can tell you about upcoming webinars. And obviously, as always, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted online in the matter of the next 24 hours. Thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.